What's up? We're live.
Nice. You caught me by surprise.
Oh, boo. Right. Merry Christmas, man. How you been?
Merry Christmas. Doing great. How about yourself?
Good. Doing good, dude. It's good to hang out again. Yeah, we haven't done a show in a while.
No, we haven't.
Monday Morning Data Chat was officially disbanded, but that doesn't stop us from getting back together once in a while and doing a chat.
Live on the air.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yes.
Hold on, let me just pull this up. Keep talking.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so you'll have to tell us what's on your mind. We chatted about a couple of things in our sort of pre-chat. And I think we'll have questions coming in too. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you have questions, drop them
in
the comments and we'll answer them. But yeah, so I think, part of this was just catching up on, just make sure it's cool, working. Yeah, part of this was catching up on, I think, on 2024.
Yep.
Yeah, what would you say the theme of 2024 has been?
I mean, it's still all Gen AI all the time, right? That has not really stopped. I guess there are probably some of us voices crying in the wilderness about more fundamental aspects of data and structured data and such. But yeah, the investment interest, the stock market, the articles and major trade and business publications still revolve fundamentally around Gen AI.
Gen AI, yeah.
How about you? What's from your perspective are the major themes this year?
Well, I think there's a couple actually, and so I feel like there, obviously AI is the kind of the layup. That's captured the public's imagination. What I also find interesting is discussions of stuff like data quality and these sorts of things is actually becoming popular. And from what I can tell from talking to friends who run companies like data quality companies, observability companies, and so forth, there's actually now demand. And also, in the data integration front, I've been hearing that there's, an uptick in, I guess, usage of those types of tools as well. So it seems like the attention on AI, at least in the corporate settings, also having a feedback loop back to data, which shouldn't be a surprise. But, I think if you've been in the data space for a bit, this may seem like it's a good shot in the arm from what we are used to, where you're constantly struggling for budget for data. And now it seems like it's becoming an easier conversation to have. So,
yeah, the integration aspect is pretty interesting, especially because during the height of the modern data stack, there was this whole bundling versus unbundling debate. And historically, the argument is that you always have cycles of bundling and unbundling. Cable was like the ultimate bundling, all of your TV glued together,
like a Cinemax,
one huge package, super expensive. And then of course streaming services. Now everyone has like 8 streaming subscriptions unbundled.
I had to cut back my streaming subscriptions. I mean, I kind of do an audit. I always have reminders of review these services, and I think around December time, so I sign up for November, December, right? You get the reminder like, oh yeah, review if you're using the service, and I cut half of them. I just cut, like not using.
You're just not touching them at all.
I don't watch Peacock that often, right? I mean, my kid liked to watch The Office on it, and now he's watched all the episodes. It's whatever.
You subscribe to watch your one show, be it 30 Rock or whatever.
I guess the Nosferatu movie is starting on Peacock though. The new one.
Okay.
So that might be cool.
That may change the conversation.
May change it. May have to get another one. But yeah, streaming's bundling, right? I mean, I remember back in the day when I was a kid, it was all about cable, and then you would get pay-per-view, so I could get WrestleMania or the Evander Holyfield fights, or Michael Spinks or some shit. But
or Mike Tyson against
Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was always
influencer of the day these days.
Yeah, back when he actually fought real boxers. But yeah, bundling, unbundling, and right now, what are your thoughts on where we are in the pendulum of bundling and unbundling in the tooling space?
I mean, frankly, we had this huge unbundling movement with the modern data stack. It's like move to Snowflake, but also move to these 5 other tools that you're going to have to use with Snowflake. And I think now there's the cost consciousness concern of these tools start costing a lot of money, but there's also just the complexity and the training and everything else that comes with having 6 different tools that you're dealing with. And so I think companies that adopted the modern data stack in all its complexity are looking to simplify quite a bit. And you have another aspect of bundling and unbundling, which is in addition to Snowflake, you might have BigQuery and you might have several other databases. And I think companies are seeing the value of just like trying to reduce the set of tools. Just
Oh
like
yeah, I mean, if AWS's
yeah,
announcements at reInvent this year was any indication, they're going all in on unifying, analytics and machine learning onto a common platform. In this case, SageMaker, and I have my own grievances about that, but what I say won't matter anyway. So
yeah, I mean, we'll see. I wish that AWS could really pivot on this, because historically they've been one of the worst companies for actually they'll provide you a bundle and it's terrible. Like the underlying infrastructure is
Who hurt
great,
you today?
but the integration between the different parts is awful. So hopefully they get better about that, which is part of the reason Snowflake was so popular, right? Like everything was kind of configured for you, and at least as far as their tool set went, they took care of most issues for you automatically. You didn't have to think about them too much.
I think it's fair, though. I mean, I was actually doing some stuff in AWS console the other day. I was just reconfiguring some orgs and accounts. I'm like, God, this is so painful.
Right.
Everything about it doesn't make any sense how they have it set up. But I don't know, because if I go into like GCP, for example, it all just sort of works, right? Like out of the bay, I don't even think too much about it. Here, I'm like, well, okay, there's a green wire across into this one, or it's just, I don't know. Anyway, but I mean, this is sort of the nature of things, right? And I think that's an example of the bundling where, if you're a company, you're going to look to pare down, the quote streaming service. In this case, the tools that you have. So the modern data stack is definitely, it feels like it's unwinding in that sense. Where my thought is, if you're not a top 3 player in, say, Matt Turk's landscape by this point, if you manage to make some moves market share wise, cool. If not, you might need to consider some new options, just because buyers at this point, again, if you're not, I'd probably say top 2 really, at that point, like, unless you have a good story or fit a unique use case, that's just because it's going to be hard to compete. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Matt at another time in post some time ago basically said that, if you want to become a true unicorn, like a company that venture capitalists want to create, you can't just have a product. You have to have a whole platform.
Yeah.
And the question is, regardless of cash flow and such, how many of these companies are actually in a position to create a whole platform? And if you're not, then you need to get acquired to be part of someone else's platform and to help build out a footprint that way.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking at a comment here. This is from Muhammad Ali. Speaking of boxing, he's a security engineer at AWS, aka LinkedIn user here. He says, obviously biased, but without derailing the conversation too much, what was terrible about the bundle?
Okay, so let's talk about why AWS the way they bundle.
Again, these are just our opinions.
These are our opinions.
Matt's
Please
opinions.
Don't do it. Okay, at a basic level, you mentioned GCP, and that's like GCP is bad at a lot of things, but they are great in creating an integrated product environment. Here's one very basic example. AWS, I think still to this day, you basically have a separate console for every region. So you switch regions, and all your stuff from the other regions is suddenly invisible. And so you have to work in one region, which means that if you're a major player and you want to have infrastructure spread across the United States or even across the world, you're managing each of those regions separately and then trying to integrate them. Whereas GCP, it's just a config within individual assets, basically. And so the console shows you everything at once, and you just say, I want this bucket to be created in the US West 3 region or whatever. What's another example? Like AWS Glue integration with Redshift, for example. It's just a lot of configuration, right? In theory, Glue is supposed to work very seamlessly with Redshift. In practice, it's a lot of configuration to make sure it works correctly.
Yeah. I always found IAM just to be a lot more painful,
right?
In that regard. But I don't know. But, then again, somebody else says here, like, GCP is so well integrated, but why is AWS so well adopted compared to GCP? I think that a lot of it, you can look at it from a couple lenses. Historically, AWS had the first mover advantage, even though Google had the cloud pretty early.
Well, they had it internally probably before Amazon did, from things I've read, like people who worked at Google, but it took them a long time to actually get it to market, and it took them a longer time to drive adoption. Their sales processes are not as good. Their customer support is notoriously bad. And that's a lot of it, right? Like AWS integration is a nightmare, but they'll hold your hand and try to get you on their platform. They'll give you lots of free credits as a new startup. There's a big community. Everyone at the meetup groups is using them, and that's just driven continued growth. But we'll see what happens over the next decade.
We'll see what happens over the next decade. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm just looking at so if I go to I'm just looking at AWS consoles here. So if I had this North Virginia, I go to my other yeah, it's all region based. Nothing changed. Just want to confirm in case anything changed between yesterday and like today. But yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I think that it's you know, but you're gonna pick the cloud you like, and more importantly, I think you're gonna pick the cloud that your company's on.
That you know, and that your company's on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you do have a preferred one, I would say it kind of also depends on what's been adopted at your company, because it's I think that the dream of doing kind of multi-cloud, hybrid cloud is still there, but it's complicated. If you're big enough, you want to do that for obvious reasons, because you can pit the vendors against each other, and that's a very good way to do that.
What I used to tell our clients is like, really, it's going to make more sense to focus on one cloud, so you're not spreading your resources out too much, but always maintain an escape route. In other words, if AWS, for some reason, it just becomes untenable, what's your escape plan, and how long is it going to take you to execute it?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see. And there's if you're reading the information, which is a good news outlet, I mean, they're talking about how NVIDIA might be launching their own cloud, and so interesting.
Well, it is interesting because NVIDIA has been investing in a lot of other cloud companies to basically host NVIDIA GPUs, because I don't think they wanted to be controlled by the major cloud providers. I don't think the major cloud providers wanted to pay NVIDIA prices. So what NVIDIA was doing for a long time is they would invest in these companies by providing GPUs. Like, here's GPUs that's worth so many $1 million in this round. This is how much our stake is in the company. And so for them to pivot to building just their own stack is like a major shift in strategy.
I think it's a smart one, though.
Yeah, potentially.
I mean, inevitably you're going to be communicating or competing, against everybody. It's just kind of the way the world is. It's not kumbaya. It's kumbaya with guns pointed at each other, I guess. So, it's the way it is, man. It's life in the big city. And you got, what was it in Europe? You got it was against Aldi, I think it was, like the grocery chain. They have their own cloud now, so it's more of a European.
Oh, that I hadn't heard about. I've got to go look that up.
Yeah, no,
I went to an Aldi when I was in Germany.
Aldi's awesome. I love Aldi. Just for the prices. Aldi,
right? You look at the prices, and you're like, wait, what? This was 10 euros for all this stuff.
Oh, it's cheap. Lidl. Sorry, Lidl is the one, not all. Lidl is the one.
Okay,
yeah,
that's right.
I'm glad I double checked this stuff. Yeah, so Lidl is the one that's doing the cloud there, and so Europe's got different needs, right? And I think it's pretty smart. Like cloud adoption in Europe, depending on the country, it's still not what it is in the States either. Like there's still, depending on the country you go to, I notice there's a lot of so on-prem going on, and people are maybe moving some workloads to clouds. But if there's a European cloud, then that's how it is. And China's got their own clouds and stuff. So let me see. Larry, what's up, Larry? He says you nailed it on big Google. BigQuery is expensive. Don't have a strategic plan to realize an acceptable ROI. Absolutely, yeah. I think that you can say that about most things.
You can say that about any of these, right? Like, AWS is notorious for just like workloads getting out of control, as is Google. And the problem is that the scalability of the cloud can be your friend or your enemy. It means that you can scale to zero and you can really control costs if you're careful. But it also means that spend can be virtually unlimited, because it's just, you run a query, it costs money. It will run no matter how many queries you're running or how big. You can, for practical purposes, probably run them, which was not true of your old
seems like a feature
system, right? It's a feature, but it's a bug too.
Yeah. So I think, and one thing that I think Matt and I still advocate is, if you're no matter what platform, cloud tool you choose to go on, to invest in learning how to operate and function in that environment with those tools. I think a lot of times, and myself included, right? You think you understand, say, AWS, you get onto AWS and you're like, cool, I know what I'm doing. But then you maybe you take one of their certs, for example, then you realize, oh gosh, they have probably their suggested way of doing stuff, and I have my opinion. And guess who wins every single time? The cloud. Right? They set it up, as you point out. If you operate within the guardrails, things like billing, things like security, things like everything, or way easier if you try and have an opinion about this and think, well, I know better than them, right? I wish you luck. I think that that's a bold move, but go for it. That's I think a lot of times, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine at GCP, he's pretty high up. He's telling me how he recommended to a customer to use his clustering and BigQuery, right?
Mhm.
Customer turns it off, and suddenly they're like, oh gosh, why is my bill like $100,000 more this month than it was for BigQuery last month? And it's just like, well, remember that clustering key I showed you? You turned that off, so we're going to give you a credit this time. If you ever do this again, you're paying.
Yeah, because BigQuery, basically you pay per gigabyte queried. And so anything that will filter down data reduces your cost dramatically. Anything that unlocks this, makes scans bigger, is going to drive up your cost dramatically. Right? Here's another example of just something, the kind of thing to watch out for. At one client, they had Teradata, and I think they discovered that like 20% of their queries were just this one query that analysts would run over and over again. And so basically they were just wasting a huge chunk of their Teradata just hammering the system with the same query over and over again. Okay, but at least their costs didn't spiral out of control because you sign the contract, you pay what you pay, you have the hardware you have. Well, if you were to do the same thing on Snowflake or BigQuery, you potentially could end up paying for that query every time it runs. Whereas if you understand those systems, figure out how to serve it from cache instead, then your costs go way, way down. So, right, the needle can swing either way, but you have to be very careful about like adopting practices from an old system into a new system with that.
We call it the curse of familiarity, right? Where, you see this often. I mean, I see this with software engineers when they're in, say, EC2. It's like, well, I know how to run servers. It's like, just because you know how to run a Linux environment doesn't mean you understand how AWS charges you for like static IPs, between AZ, data exchange, and all this other stuff, right? It doesn't mean you understand how subnets work at in AWS and all the other stuff that you kind of the gotchas I see people getting tripped up on. It's like, because I think it's like, I know how to use Linux, some flavor of it, and that's certainly not enough. But that's where we see people getting tripped up on quite a bit. I think, and it's also just a practical thing too, like using relational databases like Aurora for workloads that you shouldn't be doing it on. Like we saw one thing where like this poor Aurora database is being brought to its knees because transactional workloads were combined with these very intensive analytical stored procedures and all this other stuff. And like, why would you ever do this? But it's like, well, we got a database, we can do things in it, so let's do things. And then I think they had to start reducing functionality of the application itself because this database was getting too pegged. So know what you're doing at a fundamental level too.
To give another example, I won't give too many hints about what company this is, but we saw a major company, like a major big company in the data space, using Aurora transactional for analytics data, and it just wasn't scaling. That's not a surprise to anyone who knows how things like Postgres work, but they just had started small and not made the appropriate architecture decisions as they were growing, and they were
architecture or data modeling
and data modeling too. Yeah,
right.
Agree.
So anyway, Larry says the meter's still running when you get out of the cab. Yep, that's kind of how it is.
It will run as long as that script is running, right? No human has to be in front of the console hitting the.
I like that. That's pretty cool. Let's see here. I got a question here from Kyle. What advice do you have for someone starting on the consultancy journey? What do you think, Matt?
Well, so first of all, you want to figure out what you're really good at. So do you have like some secret sauce that you're like, I can do this better than the vast majority of other people? And maybe the other people who are doing it only work at big companies and so aren't available freelance. If you don't have that secret sauce, try to find one. Like, what's the thing that's maybe missing out there that you can really, really specialize in? And then I think another one you'll emphasize over and over again, you have emphasized over and over again, is just like building the following and building the community. Like you can't really, it's not like the 80s where you would just work out of your office and, you go to conferences and talk to people. You have to have an.
I gratuitously hand out business cards to everybody I meet.
Yeah, it's smart.
Yeah. In the 80s. I pretend it's the 80s. I go to a Regis, like the really bad beige wallpaper. And it's pretty cool. No, but in all seriousness, I think the other thing you got to understand is what you need to differentiate is like, what do you mean by consulting? because that could mean a lot of different things. Like that, to some people, that means you're actually doing hands-on keyboard work. If you were to look at somebody like Alan Weiss, who writes things like the Consulting Bible, and I would highly recommend reading his books. The guy is insufferable.
He totally is. I mean, he's completely insane and ridiculous, but also he has a lot of good
pick me up. It's straight out of the 80s, right? I need a limo with like 8 grams.
I mean, on the one hand, he'll talk about like managing expenses and things, and he'll throw out stuff like that. Like,
okay. It's just you got to be able to pay for it somehow, right? I mean, you get your blow in your limo, and it's now it's Adderall, I guess. You don't do it. Nobody does that anymore. But I think you got to understand, like, what do you mean by consulting, right? So there's I think there's services which you provide, which you're doing a lot of the work, and by work we're talking about manual work, hands on keyboard, or does consulting mean advising, right? And this is where you're providing advice, providing roadmaps, doing more strategic work with clients. And so I think you need to figure out which path you're on. I think what we found is that our temperament is better suited for the advice and the coaching part, right? So we actually we started out doing services. I think we quickly realized we didn't like this because we felt like we just had a job. And a job
where you have no control, right?
No control, no benefits, no benefits. Yeah, it's just cool. At that point, you may as well just go get a job, right? Because I think when you're putting your hands on keyboard, the problem is you are suddenly compared against everybody at the company who touches a keyboard. They're looking at you. Okay, so how much better is this guy than me, right? He makes a lot more money than I do on an hourly basis because he's a consultant or services provider. The other angle to this is that you're also being compared against things like Upwork, right? So there's a race to the bottom when you're doing the work, so to speak. So you have to be that much better. And as Matt says, differentiate to a very fine degree and be able to communicate that very clearly to people. Like, why are you, as an engineer, better than everybody else in the world? Why do I need your specific services? Maybe you invented something. Maybe you have an open source framework where you're just like the person who does this and you do the services for that, at which case, cool. If not, like, how are you going to differentiate against everybody out there, especially when you're talking Asia, where, I was in Bangalore last year, so like everyone was a software engineer there and they're all like really good. Well, I wouldn't say all of them, but pound for pound, pretty decent. So that's one consideration. So what we did, we went the other route, right? The consulting. So when we worked with teams, we would do services, but we would do it in a way where we would actually work with existing teams to teach them how to do the work. And then, then that gave us two angles. One, we could still pair program and be hands-on, but at the same time equip those practitioners with knowledge and skills and leave them in a better place and leave them functioning after we leave. So the incentives were aligned with the company. Companies, probably don't want to be paying for an ongoing consulting arrangement if they don't need to. You, as a services provider, if you're charging hourly, you want that all day, right? Because that's how you make your money. But the company doesn't want that, right? So if you come with an arrangement where like you have a fixed time when you're leaving, benefits are here, locked and loaded, everything's done, people are in a better spot than when you came in, then I think that's a win-win-win for everybody. But you're going to make more money, I would say, when you get out of that completely and you move more towards strategic work, right? So if you're architecting systems, advising technical executives,
just like talking to the executives about what the overall strategy is, right? Should we be going to the cloud? Yes or no? And what are the advantages and disadvantages? And
what data do we going to?
That's useful. Exactly.
All this stuff. So I'd say, this is one of the things where I would say, like, you need to take a good look at, an inventory of what you're good at. But the money's going to be more in the strategic area. Now, I got to say this though, there's a lot of people out there who are like consultants and strategic people and so forth. Strategy is one of these weasel words. It's like super easy to say, and nobody's quite sure what that means and so forth. And so I think you just need to clearly differentiate. Like one exercise that we found was really useful was Donald Miller's story brand, which is a way of communicating to the customer the journey you were going to take them on, right? So every customer, when they're looking for help with something, there's possibly a villain, right? Like the villain could be, I need to understand my technical direction, right? For us, it's data. We need to understand our data architecture, our data engineering, and do something different with it for whatever reason. That's the villain. Then you're the hero that takes that person, that character, to fight the villain on a journey to success, right? But you can clearly articulate that on your website. And I would say the job of your marketing doesn't need to be advertising to everybody. And actually, you should be filtering out people and telling people who, and I think communicating who you're not for. This is actually something that doesn't make any sense until you do it. But the amount of time you're going to be spending on calls, trying to filter out clients and see if it's a fit, that's going to be a lot of calls. So the sooner you can get to know actually in the situation, I think it's better. I don't know what your thoughts are, Matt.
No, I completely agree. I mean, you want to hone your messaging. I don't know if marketing it's definitely marketing, but I almost think you want a different term for this use case, because marketing is more like advertisements and it's
branding,
shotgun branding. Yeah, you want your message and branding to be so focused.
Door real quick, she's gonna. Okay. Sorry, my dog likes to open the door by hitting the little doily thing on the door. She can also open doors. She's pretty smart. Okay, there you go. You can go.
But yes, you want the messaging to be so focused that people come to you and say, "Hey, I want your services. Like, I want exactly what you're offering." And people who are not aligned are coming to you a lot. Some of them will. You can't prevent that entirely, but they know who you're.
Oh, I'd leave it open. She's going to come back through. Okay. Yeah.
Say your villain could be like preventing outages, right? So, for example, that's hit a lot of companies lately. I mean, we had that major CrowdStrike outage, which took down a certain major American airline carrier for many days because of their problems behind IT problems behind the scenes. Your messaging could be like, "Hey, I'm going to help to prevent this kind of thing at your business by analyzing your weaknesses in your IT system."
Just don't use the word crash when you work with it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think the other comment would be partially depends on what you want to accomplish, because we have had friends of ours build major successful companies by doing body shop type work, like hands-on keyboard work, by scaling, by training a lot of people, and then they sold the company and they made good money that way. So that's another way to potentially do it. But if it's you consulting, I would say strategic.
Strategic is that's the only way to go, I think, because otherwise, like you say, I think consulting is one of these things where, if you're going to do services, go big or go home, like build the body shop. I think that's where we didn't do it. Matt and I were actually in the process of actually winding down our consultancy right now. We're just busy doing other stuff, right? And I think at a certain point we're just tired of it. But we had a decision at one point, with the team: do we scale up or do we, is it just the Matt and Joe show again? And I think we decided that we're better off being a boutique. It wasn't, I don't think I'm suited to. I just don't. Mentally, I have a problem with running a linearly scalable business where I in order to get more output, I need to add more people. Maybe AI changes this. I don't know. I think it's still TBD, right? But AI could theoretically change a lot of things, which we'll get into in a second. But I think for consulting, figure out what does a business model also look like, maybe 5 years from now. I know it's always hard to say, but in the back of your head, like, where are you going with this? Right? Like what are you trying to do? What can you say in 5 years that this is what we accomplished, right? This is what I built, and this is the problem that I solved for this, for people. You should always have this. You're always thinking about this anyway, right? But I think that the other thing I would say when you're starting a business is like, have a game plan, right? It's one thing to be kind of, just do it every day, whatever, but a really good book you should read is the E-Myth. I read that many years ago, and I still reread it once in a while. Just be reminded, like, your job as a business owner is not to be the technician working in the business. Your job is, so there's three personalities, right? You got the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician in this book. The technician is who we all start out doing because we're good at something. But at some point, you're also going to need to be the visionary entrepreneur, scaling the business model, setting the strategy, but then the manager also, right? And so these are the personalities you're going to need to adopt. And if you ignore any of these, if you're simply the technician, you're going to have a job. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to hate it because it's a job you can't escape ever, like 24/7 all the time. You are the company. So like, think of the systems, think of how you're going to work on the business, not just in it, right? So, and then Kyle thanks us by saying, so he needs to figure out what he's good at and find a good amphetamine dealer. I think in a nutshell, I think that's good. Figure out what you're good at.
The idea of being focused on advising, ideally, is that you're charging enough for a very specialized skill that you're not spending all your time consulting. You're actually spending a lot of time learning and expanding your strategic ideas and marketing yourself. And so hopefully you get to the point where it's self-sustaining and you don't need it. Right? Yeah.
I mean, but a lot of this ends up evolving into stuff like content, right? So that's I think one of the things that I was
work a lot. Yeah.
I was talking to one of my friends because he's going down the content journey, but he also was doing kind consulting on the side. And he's like, well, where should I invest my time? And it's like, if I'm going to invest my time, it's going to be in content, because content will lead to more consulting if you want it, but content can also lead to more content and more, more opportunity there. Because every time you build content, you're building an asset. Every time you do consulting, it's a cold start problem, and you're not really building anything for yourself except, another check, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but I think it depends on where you're at. If this person, house is paid off, doesn't have any debt, I'm like, I'd be focusing on the long game, right? But you play different games according to where you are, right? Like this question here from Honest Tina, Joe, and I'll extend this to Matt. Could you please be my mentor or coach guide? I feel confused as I need to establish a startup software development company. Wants to quit being an employee. I'll be frank. I don't have the bandwidth to be anyone's mentor or coach at this point. I can't speak for Matt, but I think we're going to try and answer this question more broadly. You want to quit being an employee. What's the advice? We were employees once.
Yeah, that is a good question. Again, ideally within that employment context, you develop something that's very specific. I think for us, what it was for both of us basically is we were in the market doing a job at a very particular time when we realized that first of all, a lot of new data products were coming out that would supersede Hadoop. Tools. Products. Yeah. Like basically tools, cloud tools that would end up superseding Hadoop and a lot of on-prem systems. And second, as part of that, there was a big migration to the cloud ongoing. And we realized that there just weren't enough people who had understanding of how these systems worked.
Yep.
And so you could position in that spot and say, I will advise you on the strategy and training and technology relevant to migrations to Google Cloud Platform or AWS, for example. And so in your job, what specific skills have you developed that would be useful in building that kind of a practice? And if you don't have those yet, then you might want to focus on like, okay, how within my job do I build those skills, and how in my extra time do I build those skills?
But it's going to take time too, because typically your employer, especially these days, I think everyone's a bit more constrained on budget, and everything has to get done right now. I don't think that's going away, but I would say, you want to quit being an employee. I think you need to take a hard look at your situation and what you want to do, and assess what does that mean to you. I think, I've been the type of person where, I'm basically unemployable. I think temperamentally and personality wise, like I just, so I think that it's one of those things, temperamentally for me, I just always, have been a lot more entrepreneurial than working on a job. Like, I think I could never work in a big corporate job. I'm too impatient. I need things to happen too quickly, and I'm just wired differently, and it wouldn't be a fit. It would be very weird. I'd probably last a day. But you have to have that level of self-awareness, I think, or self-delusion, whichever. But you do need to understand, I think, your temperament, right? I think being an employee is about a million times, or being an employee is probably a million times easier than being on your own, in the sense where, again, you're running a business. It's not just you doing work. It's not just you getting, you asked if you need a certification. I would say, great, go for a certification, but you can do that when you have a job. It's like, you need to understand not just the technical aspects of the things you want to build, but also know how to build the team that's going to help build this business. And that's a fundamentally different skill set. And so you need to look in a mirror and understand, are you the type of person that can run a business and build a company? And you need to be honest. I don't think most people should run businesses. I don't think most people have the temperament to go out on their own. It's not me being flippant. I think it's that hard, and it causes that much mental stress. I don't think most people should do it. I'll be frank. It's like, everyone thinks they should go be an entrepreneur. I think and you have all these entrepreneurs selling you courses on how to be an entrepreneur. Right. That's
always like the hilarious, like, okay, so you're really making it, but you're selling these courses.
That's how they made all the money.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
But I'll tell you right now, like most people that I know, and this can be learned, but it takes a long time to develop this. You have to have just a certain amount of craziness, I would say, like, and just I think chutzpah to really go out and try and do a business. It's that hard. I don't think again, if you want to do it, go for it. and by all means, I think the world needs more companies, more awesome companies. But I'm going to be real, and this is me not just talking for myself, not talking for Matt. I'll talk for Matt. But just knowing a lot of entrepreneurs who have been successful, and I think more importantly, people that are just failed miserably. And it's like, this ain't for everybody. It is not for everybody. And if you think for a second, like, just because you're good at a job that you can go out and do your own thing as a company, I don't know. I would say dabble in it. The way I would suggest you get into this and see if it's for you, start something on the side. Get your first customer, get your second customer, build it slow, right? And if you can manage to start replacing a significant chunk of your income, or more importantly, be able to be what's called ramen profitable, i.e., you can like cover your living expenses, then you should make that determination. Fred says there's nothing like the need to make payroll. Yeah, dude.
Oh yeah. Payroll comes later. Like, first you need to have personal savings to be able to survive the dry spells. Because like, the reality is, even if you're really good at the strategic consulting, you may make a huge amount of money on one engagement, and then you may not have an engagement for 6 months. And so if you're not prepared to like weather that, and then once you hire people, then that's an even bigger problem. Then you need to have money in the bank of your business to handle payroll.
Because you got to think of things like receivables, right?
So
right. Customers don't pay on time usually. And so, and then you're going to be floating all that money on your own. So I would say there's a lot of things to consider. But I think it's different though these days with AI, like trying to figure out ways you could leverage AI to do a lot of the work, to scale your business. I would say this is a different time now, where maybe depending on the type of work, you might be able to, have a bit of assistance that you didn't in the past. Like a friend of mine, he has a startup right now. VC's asking, well, how big's your engineering team? He's like, well, my engineering team is Claude and ChatGPT right now, and it's actually doing pretty well scaling the code, right? And so that's maybe something to consider, like how much can you do with automation, right? And so, but this forces you to think about the systems of your business, right? So this is sort of the paradox, because if you're a startup, you don't actually know what the systems are yet, because you don't have a paying customer, and the only thing that matters is getting a customer and doing that in a repeatable fashion. To me, that's a business. Otherwise, you just have you mentioned consulting, right? Like it's a business, but it's not a repeatable business, right? So you got to have the network, the scale to get the clients. You got to have a way of getting paid. And like you said, living expenses is huge. If you say you make like $100,000 on an engagement, right? US, but then that could last you a long time, right? You live pretty frugal. I do too. If your living expenses are like $30,000 a month, good luck.
Well, that's always the danger, right? Like, people get some huge engagement and then they start scaling up their living expenses. They buy an expensive house, they buy an expensive car. And guess what? When there's a dry spell, like 6 months or whatever, you still have all those living expenses.
It doesn't go away.
And of course, there's the bigger like economic shock problem, where just in the normal course of business, even when things are good, you can have dry spells. But if there's some kind of economic shock, then the dry spell could last longer, or the amount you could charge may go down quite a bit.
Absolutely.
Just all stuff you have to
money management, right? Yep. So have that, everyone says you should have an emergency fund. I mean, you got to look at it from a different angle. That's just to cover your living expenses if you lose your job and you need to find another one. If you're starting a business, I would say at least a year of living expenses saved up.
Yeah, runway is the way I think of it, right? It's the same idea as a startup runway. It's like, how long can you go before you're just bankrupt out of business?
Well, and I think having more runway also allows you to make better decisions for your business.
Exactly, because expediency is a killer, right? You just take this one engagement that you really don't want to be doing, that takes you in the wrong direction, that can really sidetrack you for a long time, or permanently, frankly, or just like kill your business entirely.
Mm-hmm. So. Yep. Fred says there's something like the need to survive. Yeah, it's true, man. It's life in the big city. Honest, yes. So yes, your advice is to find a client, right? Yes, find a client. Find your client. Treat that client well, right? And then start looking at, also as you're servicing this client, start looking for themes, right? Where am I effective? Where is this client having success? What could I be doing better? You got to log these things and treat it like a science experiment. But don't just think because you got a client that it's over. This is just the beginning. Like this is how you become a business. It's like understanding how to serve clients, how to get new clients, and build your brand, right? So good luck to you. AI and data engineering, what's our take on this? I don't know. Is that a question? Okay, what's your take?
Okay, so I've actually been thinking a lot about this. I think you probably have too, which is like automated code generation tools, right? Like using ChatGPT to generate code to solve problems, or Copilot or whatever. I think these tools really are changing the industry a lot. Like Google has said this. I know friends working at various jobs who've said this. They're already using these extensively. What terrifies me is when I hear a junior say, "Oh, I didn't really have to learn C because I can just get ChatGPT to generate it for me." And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Especially with C.
If I heard that, I would fire you immediately. And let me explain why. You want to think of these tools as assistants, but if you don't understand what's happening under the hood when you read the code, if you're not capable of reading the code that comes out of the tools and finding the problems with it, then you are a security breach waiting to happen, basically. Among many other problems like
security systems crash,
or downtime, or financial losses if you're doing something in the financial industry.
That is true. I mean, I think what I said earlier about AI tools, you also need to know what you're doing. It should go without saying, but I think it gives you a false sense of confidence where you can just hit tab and that you're coding now. AI and data engineering. It's interesting. We did a fun, had a really good chat with Mark Balcanetti and then Matthew Scullion on the Matillion show. It was earlier this month, and we talked about, and Matt actually had a good point. The other Matt, you have good points too, but Matthew Scullion had he said basically, you got to look at the two lenses, like what can data engineering do for AI and what can AI do for data engineering.
Completely agree. Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Spot on. Yeah. But yeah, AI and data engineering, I think, if you look at what data engineering can do for AI, I think data engineering is more popular than ever. I think it's more useful than ever because, the central crux of AI working is going to be data. Always has been. It replace AI with, generative AI with machine learning, and you're at the same situation. It's always about data. There's a reason Andrew Ng invested in a data engineering course because he felt like without this, it's going to be hard to move forward, right? And so I think with he's a proponent of data-centric AI, but yeah, I mean, and that's, I guess, if we're back to themes of 2024, this was sort of the year where I think a lot of the coding tools got critical mass. Like he had, Cursor and GitHub Copilot. Windsurf's another one. I think I'm starting to see that more on Blue Sky. People are, but the IDEs are, everyone's becoming effective at it. But I think to your point, does it allow you to do things more intelligently or dumb things more quickly?
Yeah, because I mean, I've seen a lot of open source maintainers complaining about this extensively. You'll have someone who knows nothing about coding at all and has ChatGPT generate some basic code for their framework, and it contains like obvious errors. Like the code is actually pretty good, all things considered, but there are obvious errors. And so these maintainers get bombarded with these questions that are just like computer science 101, like high school level computer science. And it's like, start using the tool, but then you need to learn the underlying language, and then it's an accelerator for you. But without that, it's a big, big risk.
Yeah, it is a big, big risk. And so we'll see. I mean, it's early days. I think that, it is, there's companies out there. I think, the CEO of Devin or the company behind Devin was saying that, right now it could probably function as a junior level engineer, but I don't know what that means exactly. And, but it's getting good at solving coding challenge type problems. And that, this particular individual is a coding competitive coder champion, I believe, at a young age. And so, for those types of problems, sure. But is that the type of problem you have in the real world at like most companies? No.
Well, and there's been a pretty active debate about this in the context of LLM reasoning, like these next gen tools where you're basically doing multiple generations and answer assessment. And you do a lot of work behind the scenes before you give an answer, unlike traditional where you just spit out the answer immediately. Apple, actually, some researchers at Apple published a paper in October basically arguing that the reasoning tools actually struggle with anything they haven't seen before, just like the traditional LLM approaches. It's very controversial because that was actually before, GPT-01 came out, and now O3, I think, is out in limited release. But the question is, will these tools be able to solve new problems that no one has ever solved before, or are they just scraping so much data that they've seen the problem before and that's how they're able to solve it? And so that remains.
What are your thoughts on last week O3 was announced? and what was it, the ARC AGI or whatever it was? It's a certain set of math problems where it could reason. You're a mathematician.
And
What
again,
are your thoughts?
I think that was the argument. It's like these benchmarks are actually known problems or leaked problems, right? That's become a big problem in the math competition space. Things like the AMC, the American Math Competition, that people leak the answers in advance. And kind of the same thing is happening with these LLMs, that even if you run them on a brand new competition, the data may have been leaked a month ago on a forum somewhere, and they may be trained on it. And so the question is, can you really, we need more clean room testing where you have people, basically mathematicians creating brand new problems and then testing against those to say, can these reason in a novel way? In other words, something they haven't seen before or not. And I think that's still an open question. On the one hand, if you're marketing your LLM, then you're always going to claim these like really impressive benchmarks. But the funny thing is, they were claiming these with GPT-4, that like they were basically as good as a real lawyer and as good as a real mathematician. And now they're claiming, oh, GPT-4 is old.
Well, you could pass the LSAT.
Pass the LSAT and other things.
That doesn't make a good lawyer.
Well, but now they're claiming that was like a high school student, and this new one is really, really good. It's like their capabilities are impressive, but we also need to recognize the boundaries of limits, and they may be a little more limited than we actually think they are based on testing we've seen.
So far, but at the same time, I'm constantly amazed at just how much, if you compare it 2 years ago to today, it's like, what was it? GPT-3 was out, and then that was, it's almost laughable how.
Oh, I know.
Crap
right. How primitive it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, they're great synthesizers. I think the idea that they're just regurgitating the data they're trained on, I don't think that's accurate at all. There's lots of evidence that they can like build more complex ideas off of what they're trained on. But the question is, can they really solve truly novel problems that humans struggle with? We're still, the jury's out on that, and we're making advancements all the time. So we'll see.
Yeah. There's some book I have upstairs. I can't remember the name of it, but why machines will never be intelligent or something like that, I think is a synopsis of it. And so it's funny because it's right next to a book I had, which is Why Machines Learn. I
think on Hacker News today, I saw people comparing these LLMs to like idiot savants. Like idiot savant, typically some kind of learning disorder.
It can peak in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, exactly. Who could just like memorize entire books, like the movie Rain Man that came out in the 80s was based on Kim Peek, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, it could do amazing things, but like lacked basic social functioning, and like basically if you talk to him, came off as a person with a disability, and he did have a disability, and yet could do these remarkable things. And that's the comparison. Like, these tools can do remarkable things, but we also need to recognize their limits and the risks that come with that.
I mean, it's not to say they're not useful. I mean, I use them all the time, and they're amazing. But so I don't know. It's still early days. I mean, we're still, in my opinion, still at the B00.1 stage of all this stuff. Like, just given the amount of money and attention on it, unless something catastrophic happens where everyone just throws up their hands and leaves the AI market, I think there'll be progress made. I mean, you have people saying there's limits to scaling laws, but at the same time, if I look at the people saying that, they also left certain companies where the scaling laws were sort of being, maybe hitting walls there. And so, I don't know. People say things. You got to always look at the motivations of people when they say things too. So,
I mean, based on what we're seeing right now, I think we're headed toward a big business pivot in the space. And that means maybe kind of more of a rationalization of actually trying to make money, and maybe a step back from trying to train on more and more parameters. It doesn't mean the progress is going to stop, but it means that maybe it could be the end of a bubble, or it could be just a different type of business pivot, or we figure out different ways to make money. But I think based on reporting, this is more human and business reporting, like Wall Street Journal's article about a week ago about stuff going on within OpenAI. It sounds like the status quo, just like build larger and larger models and buy more and more GPUs, is probably coming to an end, and something else is coming.
Don't say that.
Yeah.
Got a question about my poster. It's weird company to mention this. Do you guys know that the poster hanging behind is praising North Korea's? So actually, this poster I got from my grandpa, who was one of the first American troops in the Korean War back in the day. That was a poster that that was North Korean poster that he picked up because the North Koreans were about to go and kill him and all of his group. So I think 80% of them got killed. But that was, I think, the March on Busan, I believe, or something like that. But so that's a relic. But it's interesting because on the back of it's a love letter to my grandmother. So he actually made it out. and it was saying, I hope it's pretty bad here, but I hope to make it back home soon. So that's the significance of it. So it's actually a North Korean propaganda poster they dropped on all the American and South Korean troops. He fought in World War II as well, and a lot of the major battles there. And he said the Korean War was just horrific. It made World War II look like a cakewalk. I'm also Korean, by the way. So if anyone wonders where the poster, not from my grandpa, but from his son, to make more sense. My dad was also stationed in Korea for a while. So yeah, so it's that's the origin of it. But yeah, and these other posters here are interesting. So some of these are Chinese advertisements from the 1920s, actually, before communism. So you had a cigarette ad, and then these two women on a thing, you can't really see it, but they're holding a bottle of a pesticide. It's a very strange ad. So I found these.
I thought that was beer at first.
No, that's a
It looks
pesticide
like beer
bottle right there. Yeah, it's
but I see the sprayer in her. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
isn't that funny? So it's interesting. Yeah, but I have a lot of interesting art. But yeah, that's it's praising North Korea's ideology, yes, because it's from North Korea. They literally sent that to my grandpa and all of his people right before they killed a bunch of them. So that's the story. But anyway, he made it out, and I thought I found that actually after my grandpa passed away, because I was looking at it and I saw this love letter on the back, written on the back of it. I was like, oh, that's cute. I teared up for a bit. But anyway, that's the story.
Well, and it's funny in a world where like so much of what we possess now is just information and bits and such, and so much what we interact with, these kind of like relics that aren't just like fascinating physical relics, but like things that have a story from a person that you knew that like influenced you. That it's just a different level of connection.
Oh yeah, you I mean, you try and find that it's you can't, you wouldn't be able to find it. It's priceless, right? So this room has a bunch of relics in it. Like what is that? I have a set list that Maynard from Tool gave me. So from a Tool show. So yeah.
Do you have a copy of Chairman Mao's Thoughts, like the original little red book or anything like that?
I probably do somewhere, not the original one, but yeah.
My dad was in Hong Kong during the Vietnam War, briefly in the Navy, just like on leave, and he at the time there was like a communist district in Hong Kong, so he like walked over there and was talking to the shops, and he bought a copy of the original Chairman Mao's Thoughts. Unfortunately, he like lost it because he loaned it.
You should have kept that. Yeah, I'm sure you can still find, not the original stuff,
but
though. Not the originals.
The originals are like collector's items, like hardcore collector's.
Oh, the zombie pictures. So this is funny. So this is this one is a thrift store painting, which is kind of funny actually. So this woman took these funny thrift store paintings, like the cheesy background ones. And then she painted zombies over them. It was hilarious. I'll never forget the moment I brought that home, because my wife just looked at me. She's like, you spend your money on the dumbest stuff, I swear. So that's the zombie painting there. So it was but she did, so this artist she found like a lot of campy thrift store scenery paintings and painted just the most god awful things on, just hilarious. So like Star Wars characters, all that stuff. So anyway, that's where it comes out. So yeah, a tour of I don't know, vinyl, really rare vinyl. Yeah, this place is, it's kind of a hipster museum. So
this is Joe's other podcast, Joe's Cave or something.
It'd be a pretty funny podcast. I have all kinds of crap in this place, but Fred, part of the city would have enjoyed France War if people weren't always shooting at him. Yeah, I heard the same thing. So yeah, it's it's interesting. Going to Europe, I always find it's interesting because the the legacy of the wars still are with the people there. In Germany, it's particularly interesting because it is, a lot of the cities were been destroyed, in London as well, right? But so it's and then I think that just the memories are still somewhat with the people, not especially with the older people. They're all kind of passing away at this point. But
well, I mean, so part of the freshness of the memories was kind of the memories came back when there was an invasion into adjacent countries. Like Germany and France see that differently than we do in the United States, because it's not that far from their border, and they remember things that happened in not that long ago. So.
Yeah, exactly. We can keep going for a while. It's Christmas, whatever. So yeah, that's a bit of a tour. But yeah, history is a weird thing. I don't know. I think you're a history buff. I'm also a history buff. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you understand history, or at least you always realize there's versions of history, and it's the old saying, he who I don't know, history's written by the winners, I guess, right? So, but it's always interesting to go back and I think review alternate versions of history from other countries, because you get different takes that you know as you see. So, am I using AI in music producing? No, I'm not actually. I'm old school. Yeah.
Well, what's your opinion though? Let's go into this. We'll make the data connection here. Like,
Sure.
where is that going to take us in the music industry? Because I think you kind of worked on the edges of the music industry for a while, right? Like doing some promoting, and then we're DJ for a bit. So where do you think we're headed?
I mean, it's interesting. I feel like the availability of software and if I'm talking about electronic music in particular, but other music, it's certainly getting easier to quote make music. I think it's about making music that's interesting has always been the problem. But you've had great tools for a long time to make music, and DJing is like as simple as syncing two tracks together. I mean, anyone could theoretically do it, but why is it that it's still still a long tail game where most of more kind of a power law, or you have a few successful musicians, and then because it's easier than ever for tracks to get out to music to be available. You can put yourself on Spotify, SoundCloud, whatever, LinkedIn, I guess. So I think it comes back to the central question of, one, it's distribution, and two, are you making stuff that people care about? And I think with DJing and music, I should be posting a lot more tracks on SoundCloud. Maybe I'll do that soon. But it's just one of those things where I feel like there's no shortage of producers or DJs, and at least but does that mean that they're going to be any good? I don't know.
So like, let's talk about Max Martin. I want to compare. You know who Max Martin is, I'm sure. So he's the guy. He was the Swedish producer / songwriter who wrote, I don't know if it was 100 or hundreds of hits. If you think of Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, that was all Max Martin. And so he was almost like a human AI. Like, he could just generate these hit tracks that would just
Pharrell's the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And so the question is, do those super producers kind of get replaced by AI, and do they generate interesting music that people actually listen to? Or
I could see something like that potentially happening. I think music, especially when the creation of music is definitely going more into the background. But yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think if the producer, the AI producer, could vibe with the recording artist, maybe. But recording artists are simply nothing more than faces that can go on tour and put on good concerts, right? I mean,
it's always controversial, right? But it probably depends partially on the recording artists. Like, some of them are writing all their own material and creating their own shows, and some are just regurgitating whatever the producer told them to do.
That's just it, right? But why is Taylor Swift the biggest, not just musician in the world, but one of the biggest stars in the world, period, right?
Well, actually one of the wealthiest, anyone with any billionaire is one of the wealthiest people in the world, and at this point, huge,
right? But I mean, it's DJing is a weird thing where I think that it's it's the amount of money that DJs are making these days is insane, right? Especially top tier DJs. I mean, you're probably making I don't know, a couple $100,000 to $500,000 per night for a set, or more, for big names. But then, even if you're kind of, playing at kind of more underground clubs, but the established ones, you're probably still going to get 10, 20, 30 or more, maybe 50 a night. Not bad, especially if you're doing that every weekend, and probably Friday, Saturday as well, in different gig. I mean, you could probably be making more than you would a day job. I mean, one of my bigger regrets was probably not going more into DJing and
just saving up money and then just retiring, basically, or doing whatever.
A lot of them do that, yeah. So I mean, it just or most of them probably don't. Most of them don't save up money. They just blow it all on becoming a consultant. That's an illusion.
Which I think is interesting. I tend to agree, but I'm kind of I also have to think to myself, but why is that the case, and will it always be the case?
I don't know. I think that it's going to be AI plus authenticity more than it is AI or humans, right? So I think that's kind of where it's going. It's Centaur, right? And then Larry, depends on the type of audience. And I think absolutely. but I think there's a reason live music has become one of the things that's where a lot of musicians make a lot of money now. Like, we just dropped a bunch of money on tickets to go to the Kilby Court block party in Salt Lake City, which
they
is
have
like
some big acts coming.
huge.
Like, Weezer is coming to Salt
Weezer,
Lake.
you got
That's a lot.
Beach House, you got New Order,
Yeah,
Devo. I mean, it's ridiculous. Then you look at the lineup, and it's one of the best concert tours in the world. But it ain't cheap, right? And I actually know the guys that are the company behind that. He used to live in my condo.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like it's a huge concert promoter now. So,
so did you read Nexus, like Yuval?
I've not.
Harari?
I've not read it.
So I read that recently, and I actually haven't. His really famous book is *Sapiens*, and one of the arguments, he talks a lot about how machines are going to be taking over decision making and such. And I'm like, well, I'm not convinced that's going to happen yet. And the reason is rather simple. It's not in an organization or in a political system. It's not the smartest people that are making the decisions. It's based on social capital. And social capital also applies to concerts, right? This particular human, you follow them over time. They have a story. You relate to them. That's why you pay like $200 for a ticket to actually see them in person performing live to some degree. I mean, there's automation always in synthesizers, but performing live. And so I don't know. I think it's going to be a long time before we get away from that in any of these spaces. Like, these will be tools, but when will AI have social capital? That's not clear to me. And I think there is a data connection here. That's a lot of data engineering and organization. Yeah, trumpet band the box upward. But a lot of data engineering and organization and technical leadership is not just about technical skills and the ability to write the best code. It's about the ability to persuade people that your ideas are correct and gain trust in the organization. And that's something that software developers and data engineers struggle with, right? Because we tend to be technical people that don't naturally have all these skills of leadership.
No, I was writing about it the other day, and it's interesting because I've been following this whole thread about how AI agents, and if we want to talk about the trends of next year, fine. AI agents is one of them. There you go. But I think it's one of those things where I started drawing parallels to, because it's like our SaaS application is going to go away because now you can just have personalized workflows for everything through agents. And I'm like, well, maybe we'll see. I think, again, it depends on the underlying data and how well these workflows and agents are trained and operate and so forth. But it got me thinking about the broader picture, really, which is kind of what you're talking about, which is, it's something I've been talking about, but in much the same way, if you think of an application like a company, this big monolithic thing, the whole system's being inverted now, where like everybody has a capability of doing awesome stuff. What do you need a company for? If a company is there to support an application, for example, but the entire paradigm is being inverted, everyone has the power of being a company, I guess, theoretically, right? So it's something I've been noodling on. I can't say that it's a fully formed opinion, but it's something that I think, the ability for people to scale beyond what they would be able to do at a company, I think that is a very big possibility now. I'm starting a new company. I'll announce it next month around this time, but like, the ability to do a lot of things that you needed a lot of people for is inverting. And so the question is, does this mean like everybody just basically becomes a company of one? This totally contradicts what I just said about entrepreneurship. That actually doesn't go away. You're still going to be the mental part of it's still different. But like, I think that, I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, what is the nature of a company when everybody has a capability of one?
And I think a lot of it is, again, a social capital issue. In other words, why did you buy from Amazon? There are probably cheaper deals out there. But you buy from Amazon because you have an existing relationship, you have an account, and you know that when you order and they say it's going to show up tomorrow, it will probably show up tomorrow, and it's probably not going to be broken.
I heard something from Walmart. You know when it's showing up? Not when they said it was going to.
Right?
No. Yeah. Check this out. So by the way, I had to go to Walmart. I didn't have to. Yeah. I was there because I thought they had a new Apple Pencil Pro on sale.
Okay.
And the site said $99.
Oh, yeah.
I show up to the counter and he's like, yeah, we got it right here. I'll ring you up. And it's like $130 retail. I'm like, but the site says it's $99. He's like, well, you have to order through the site and then come pick it up.
And it's right there.
I was like, you could also just give me the credit for the price. Like, what is this? And then, but I was like, fine. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just order it and then bring it home. I'll get it delivered to my house. Sorry, we're it's the Joe and Matt show. Plus, we're going over.
But I think this is all data relevant, right?
It is data relevant.
That's, again, I think business relationships, people do look for the lowest price, and they often get burned by that. But it's also like, how much do you trust the business? And the thing about going to Walmart is they are a low price, but you also know kind of what you're getting, right? You know that they're probably going to get your product to you.
Terrible service.
Terrible service. Could be worse.
In every regard, right? Terrible service. They show up, got money in hand. I can buy this right now from you if you want.
But no, you're going to pass up that sale. So like,
yeah, I'm not going to pay extra. I'm an idiot,
yeah.
Right? Oh, yeah, we'll ship it to you. Oh, it's going to be late.
Doesn't matter.
I'm like, okay, thank you. Your NPS score is 0. Biggest surprise in data. Let's go through some of these questions.
This is interesting. Like, what did surprise you this year? Because I don't feel like there were a lot of surprises in data this year. I feel like ChatGPT was a surprise 2 years ago, but we've been sort of just like, the whole trend has continued. But tell me, like, what has jumped out at you this year?
I think, again, the discussions of like fundamentals being important, and I think data quality, like a lot of old school stuff, I think that was the most shocking thing to me, because we've been on this trajectory where it's been about just, latest tool, latest flash in the pan, this, that, or the other thing. I'm like, gosh, you guys are, it's like people are finding religion now or something, and getting back to basics. And I think that was the most shocking thing. I mean, if you've been in this game long enough, you realize there's always going to be a new tool. There's always going to be some new announcement. AI and machine learning and data practice. I wouldn't say practices, but technology evolve and change. I would actually say data practices almost devolve in a lot of ways and go backwards. So I think that was what shocked me most is seeing the, I think, interest in data modeling, right? Working on a new book on data modeling, which will tie into the next question we're going to answer. But data modeling is one of those things where people are interested in it. I didn't think that would be the case. I about gave up on the books. I'm like, nobody's going to read this dang thing. Then I started a community, and that's going well. And, it gives me a lot of hope that, discussions I have with people around the world, things like data modeling, data quality, and all this stuff. But I think we got to adopt the practices to today, to what's happening. I think a lot of the discussions I see when we're talking, these discussions are stuck in the past. The practices are stuck in the past. And I think this is the biggest junction where I think 2025, I'm hoping that, we can start bridging these gaps, use AI to scale a lot of problems that we've had data management, for example, right? Like we have all these data sets, we can't seem to get data quality. I'm like, I don't know, what's really good at that maybe is, leveraging something like AI, which is good at, especially transformer models, good at translating and stuff like that. So
yeah, I agree. Like there's, I don't know if virtuous cycle is the term here, but there's going to be a lot of interaction between these like traditional approaches that we've implemented poorly in many cases and newer tools. I don't think they're going to be independent.
But I see a lot of the old guard though, right? Old guard and data kind of, I think, clinging to,
very rigid interpretation in books that were written in the 90s, for example. And it's like, okay, even in the 90s, that was an opinion and you had to kind of implement it in practice. And now we've moved way beyond that. You need to use that as part of a larger practice.
It's trying to change the depends diaper. That's what you got to do. Is writing books rewarding?
It depends. It's very demanding. It's not for everyone. What do you think? Your new one, we've done it before, but like, how's the new one going?
I would say it is. Well, did you find it was rewarding to you?
I think I did. Yeah, I like writing, but writing is inherently a very tedious process, which is why a lot of people don't like to do it. On the other hand, a degree of tedium can actually be very appealing. Why do people like woodworking? Well, it's a whole lot of tedium, but if you're very careful and focused, it's very meditative, and then you get this product at the end. Writing books is a lot like that, I think.
I think it is. And I think for me, it was rewarding in the sense where I know when we started the writing fundamentals of data engineering, I think we also often commented, like, I think we both thought like we knew what data engineering was. And we started writing about it. I think we're like, yeah, we don't know a damn thing about this. Actually, there's a lot to know.
Something, right? But you have to reinvent your knowledge and expand.
You do. You realize how much you don't know, right? Like, I think, so I find it's rewarding. It's good. I think, as I always say, writing is thinking, and I'm not the only one who says that. I think any writer says that, but it is true. Like there's no better way to get to know a topic than writing about it. You can make a course about it. You can make TikTok videos, but I think the level of depth that you have to go to think about a topic, that writing is simply irreplaceable in that way. I've yet to find a substitute.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the thinking happens not when you're writing, but it's that writing process of forcing you to think through things that triggers it. And then you'll be in the shower doing the dishes or whatever. And you're like, oh, X, Y, and Z, or you'll stew on something for the next 10 hours because you tried to write about it. And you're like, I'm not quite comfortable with my answer on this, or I haven't quite found what I'm looking for here.
Yeah. But I think the rewards are intrinsic and extrinsic too. Like I think intrinsically, i.e. for us, it was good in the sense where I feel like we just accomplished something
Yeah.
cool, right? And so that's good. Extrinsically, I think the book Fundamentals of Data Engineering undeniably changed Matt and I's trajectory.
Yeah,
it got us
absolutely true.
You know, I think it brought us a lot of benefit. I wrote about it in my newsletter a couple weeks ago about, you know, how it benefited us, and I think it got us out of kind of this bubble of being local, right, and where we were, and it brought us to a global scale. And so, you know, I think that was kind of cool to see that people were willing to read it around the world, and it's been translated in I don't even know how many languages, and it just brought I think a lot of opportunities that we just wouldn't have been able to have. And books are weird in that sense where you know, people, I don't know, for whatever reason, people look at you differently once you have published a book. I still don't understand why that is. But they do. They kind of look at you like cringe or something. I don't know. So
it's like this mysterious is like climbing Everest
new book.
right?
You know, when's the new book? When will it be published? I think I'm planning to have most of it up on Substack by this spring. The publication date is going to be probably in the summer now, and the reason for that is there's just a lot of I would say there's a lot of logistics outside of writing that needs to happen, editing and production and so forth. And seeing as this is the first book I'll be doing, you know, kind of on my own, I just want to make sure I got all the things in place. So the summer is when you'll be able to get like the final version of it. I'm comfortable at least advertising that vague season as a time frame in which I'll have the book ready. But you know, it's this is a very challenging book to write. I would say it's an order of magnitude harder than Fundamentals of Data Engineering, which I think was a hard book to write. That was a very difficult book, and this one's actually harder. I think at least by 10 times or some made up integer. Okay. So
it's made up, but it's real.
It's made up, but it's real. You can graph it on a log chart. It's fine. Let me see here. Richard asks, I know analytical engineers are rising nowadays, but what data engineering skills are most crucial for the data analyst to transition to analytical engineer? It's interesting. So I think there's been some pushback, I think, on the notion of analytics engineer in general. Have you been following any of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's been pushback since the notion came out. And I would definitely say over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of pushback on this. So,
why?
I think that is a good question. I think partially, I think if you're a really good analytics engineer, you're probably worth your salt. It's really just kind of the newest version of what we used to call ETL developer.
Or data. I think it's a subset of data engineering.
It's a subset of data engineering, just like ETL developer in some sense. But I think part of it is that during the modern data stack craze from 2020 to 2022, I would probably frame it, there was a lot of overhiring in this domain. And so some people were really good at the job and some people weren't so good at it and were just collecting a paycheck to build a lot of very expensive, very complicated stuff. And so
sounds like every job then.
It was, yeah. But I mean, some people turned out to be really good at this job and hopefully still have jobs or moved on to something else, like another job somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I think it was just the hype cycle around it, right? Anytime. So
what data engineering skills? So he's asking what data engineering skills are most crucial for data analysts to become an analytical engineer. So there's actually like a couple threads here. One, data engineering skills for analysts and what are useful for analytic engineers. What would you suggest here?
Okay, so data modeling. I mean, you've already talked about it, right? Like
not important.
Not important at all. I mean,
just raw dog it and throw your data into the Snowflake. It's fine.
I would say some of the real traditional data engineering jobs, going back to Hadoop and such, maybe actually didn't use data modeling as much. So you're just like processing, petabytes of text data and you're not really thinking about a model. Okay, fine. But when you get into analytics, it's actually very important to have a quality model that people can use to answer business intelligence questions, for example. Yeah.
I think also, like, if you're coming from an analyst role, I would say you actually have something that engineers don't have, or I'm assuming they don't have. You have the ability to understand what's going on, right? From an analytics perspective, this means you probably understand a business or a process or something you're analyzing. So to me, I've always felt, because my background was in analytics, machine learning, whatever you call data science, but being able to diagnose business problems and work backwards to the data and the systems was actually, to me, an easier leap when I've seen people going the other direction. Because when you go the other direction, you're focused so much on the engineering and the tooling, it's hard for you to understand sometimes the outcome of what that data is supposed to produce and provide. But if you understand the outcome of it, you already know the answer. You just need to work back, actually. Like, you already watched the movie. You just need to watch the prequels, understand how you got there. So I think that's how I view it. But I would say being able to communicate is good. But as an analyst, I hope you're doing that. If you aren't, I don't know how you're an analyst, but that's awesome if you are. Yeah, so that's how I'd look at that.
Yeah, we used to always say that the analysts know where the bodies are buried. So in other words, if
Yeah.
I'm an engineer and I'm like, why doesn't this data make sense? I'll go talk to the analyst. They'll be like, oh yeah, the Google Ads API does this one thing where it drops certain events and it creates fake events or something. They'll tell me all about it.
Yeah.
So like, keep that skill when you go more into data engineering side of things.
And where the bodies are buried is usually in your where clause.
That's true. Yeah, but also APIs, right? Like an API version changes, privacy controls that change the data. Your third-party data suppliers, your partners who aren't providing all their data or provide it in an inconsistent form, all those things can attack you.
Yeah, but yeah, I'd say it's an interesting one. Maybe that's worthy of I don't know, a bit of a deeper dive. But hopefully it gives you an answer. If not, I don't know. Fred asked, "What's the topic of your next book, Matt?"
We'll hopefully have more to say about that soon. And also we're doing some recording on another project right now, which should be, yes, very cryptic.
Who's
yes.
we?
There are multiple we's here. So yes.
Cool. I think, is it the book we talked about? I'm not gonna say much about it, but
yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, there's that one and there's some other stuff going on too. So
dang, there's like a book on like bodybuilding or something. Like, what do you
there's another project that's a bit more academic in nature. It's basically what it comes to, more like a textbook. So
okay, good for you. What about the data lake house? Is also uprising, I guess. What do you think about lake houses?
I mean, I think it's good in concept. I think the potential impediment for the lake house is the same thing that was an impediment for Hadoop, which is excessive complexity. So everyone in principle wants a hyper flexible data stack where you can use any tool with any kind of data. In practice, when it comes to managing that complexity, a lot of companies opt away from it. So we'll see.
But would an open table format solve that once and for all, Matt?
In principle, but we've seen how the politics go around that, right?
Well, politics? Pray tell, what do you mean?
Well, meaning if you have a particular format like Iceberg, say, and one company buys another company that's responsible for it, doesn't mean the company that bought it is doing anything bad, but everyone is going to be suspicious. That's how you get politics, right? Like everyone is going to be suspicious about the future direction of that table format. And that's kind of the kind of issue you're going to run into, because all the competitors want to interoperate enough to be a part of that conversation, but not so much that people are leaving their platform to use something else. So that's
it happens. That's actually, I think, a good advice for the other question too about becoming an engineer. Is just there's always politics around tooling. As an analyst, you're probably seeing politics around data and all this stuff.
Definitely.
But like, so I think the lake house, to me, it's interesting. I feel like it's one of these things, like I can't tell if people are going into this because they feel they have a need for it, or they feel it's the next big thing. And because you do definitely remind me, there's a lot of Hadoop vibes. I posted about this because somebody else posted about this in the article
there was
last week.
Yeah, it was like a Medium post.
And it's definitely true. Like I think, back then I saw people adopting Hadoop for their, which is a quote big data tool, and these people had all of like 10 gigs of data in their Hadoop stack, and I'm like, I don't know, you could probably just do that with happy New Year to you too. So I feel like, is there a problem you're trying to solve like right now with a lakehouse architecture that even a simple data warehouse wouldn't solve? I don't know. So I feel like in some cases it's great. In some cases, I think for some people it's like it's good resume driven development. It's a solution looking for a problem. Now, where I think it's going to get interesting is when we start. This is another thing for 2025. Is I think we're going to start moving more into kind of multimodal data sets, images, unstructured data, whatever, mixing that in with structured, semi-structured data. That's the essence of what I'm writing about in my book, Mixed Model Arts, which is like unifying the data modeling end to end. I think this is going to be one of the things that the Lakehouse will, hopefully facilitate.
Completely agree with that, and I think that's part of what's happened in this.
But even Bill Inman would say like the data warehouse also he never said you couldn't use unstructured data in it.
Right.
Text data, he's been doing that for like a while himself.
Well, when we had him on, he basically said, well, it doesn't mean I disagree with the idea of the data lake. It's just that you still need the curated version,
Bingo.
of it, which is the data warehouse, right? Like the stuff you want to keep, you move into the data warehouse. Stuff you want to be nice, you put in the data warehouse.
Yeah. And so lake house, trailer park, whatever you want to call it. It is what it is.
I think what it comes down to is that the problem is that not everyone needs that level of flexibility, and that's where I think there could be a pullback. On the one hand, multimodal raw unstructured text is going to be much bigger in the future, but like a lot of people just need to get basic business.
Well, this is where DuckDB is getting a lot of traction right now.
Exactly,
same with Polars for the same reason. Simply run on the machine. I mean, like I said, I'm looking at this Mac Studio right now. It's got like 30 cores or something like that. It's a beast. I got a new MacBook Pro Pro series upstairs. It's got a lot of cores as well. Right. You can run pretty crazy workloads. Now, of course, you mentioned the governance piece. That's a big one. But like, if I needed sophisticated tooling, I probably more inclined just to run it on my machine these days. Like, why do I need to pay for cloud bills when I can? Thing is, depends. So I think there's a tale of two worlds. One is if you have sufficiently big data. Open table formats, lake houses make a lot of sense. I would say go for it or don't use something in the cloud. Yeah. But increasingly, and this is what Jordan Tagani's been talking about, small data, this is a big theme of this year, and it's going to be a big theme of next year. Like, what do you actually need to do and where do you need to do it? This thing's, I don't know, with that hard drive there, what's that, 5 terabytes there, and terabyte here, 6 terabytes. Storage plus I don't even know how many thumb drives I have laying around. I mean, you could do some pretty serious damage with just this machine here.
You really can. Yeah. And you always have to assess like how much of this thing I'm going to adopt is based on the hype cycle of the last 1 or 2 years, and how much will I need 5 to 10 years from now. Like always it's tough because the industry changes so fast. But even though 3 months ago seems like a long time ago, you still want to think of the long time horizon for what you're building. Yeah.
I guess it's 12:30 now. Geez. But so. As a reminder, Matt and I started this podcast or Monday Morning Data Chat way back in the day because we just recorded the conversation. Matt and I would talk like this for hours, actually. This is like literally us just talking, and I guess it is just us now talking again, interspersed with questions. But one question I have is, what do you think about, what's your advice to companies how would you recommend companies get into AI or continue on their path with AI in 2025?
Oh boy, that is a tough one.
Everything too. I'm talking like, Notion boards with Notion AI, whatever, like just AI, whatever.
I mean, a good place to start is code generation tools, right? I mean, I think those actually have a degree of maturity, but again, my big caveat is that your engineers actually need to know the programming languages better to do that so that they can catch the problems that you can potentially generate this way. So you're risk managing and also doing real engineering and not trying to let the AI do the job for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a good starting point because it's amazing how well they do on code generation. Even really compared to other tasks, they're just amazingly good at it.
Really good. Yeah, I would say just, I use it every day. And it's interesting starting a new business. I'm trying to figure out workflows where it makes sense, to do AI and where it makes sense to just do kind of more heuristic. So I think it's a question of like probability versus, probabilistic workflows versus deterministic workflows, right? If you're okay with like fuzzy answers to fuzzy questions, go for it. Like one thing I dorked around with last week when I was in Scottsdale was Claude computer use. Have you seen that?
It's kind of scary, right? Like
it's cool. Get the Docker image and dork out on it. But it's like so for the audience, like Claude computer use, you can go just type in Claude computer use. It's in beta. If you're going to test it, get the Docker image. Don't let this thing on your computer.
It's like the ultimate malware. It can just take over and do anything it wants to.
You can tell it what to do. You can say, okay, so I had it like, research some stuff for me and make a spreadsheet out of it. And it did it.
Amazing. That's wow.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, so this is cool. In constrained environments, like I want this running, my definitely some operations in the business for sure. Right. And but I'd say, that's one place to start too. I mean, I dialogue with it all the time, even on topics of my book. And I've been using it in some cases for development editing for my chapters. And I find like it actually pinpoints stuff that I and probably my friends would not have seen. Because like, as we always say, like you and I are pretty much, we're of hive mind. If like one of us misses something, the other one, we both miss it. And I think a lot of this is when you're reviewing stuff with friends, the same thing happens.
Yeah, you hang
So-
out all the time. You talk about the same things. You run in the same circles. You go to the same conferences.
Same
There's
blind
stuff you're
spots.
simply not going to see. So
Mhm.
yeah, and this is interesting to me because what you're explicitly not doing is having it write all the stuff for you and just publishing it. We've seen lots of that, frankly.
Yeah, that's corny.
Even it's bad. It's really bad. And I think as you're using these tools, one mindset you want to have in mind is this like notion of anti-fragile. So like this Taleb, I think originated, Nicholas Nassim Taleb originated this.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, what are your big risk points? In other words, he's thinking about societal risk of whole systems and economies collapsing. But like the way you're using the tool, what's the worst that could happen? And ideally, if you're just using it to critique your pros, the risk is limited. If you're using it to automate interaction with customers, the risk goes up. If you're using it to automate your bookkeeping or your interaction with banks,
Risk goes up.
the risk goes up. So that's where you need, or just deploying code without checking it. Risk gets really, really high.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're containing the risk while taking advantage of the tool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And use it for a dialogue agent. Like I said, it's great for chatting about ideas. It'll help you understand things hopefully from a different angle, but obviously, don't put confidential information in unless you have an enterprise version. But these things are here to stay. I would say just, if you're at a company and that is using them, continue to use it, continue exploring ways to automate workflows, code, whatever. If you're not using them, I don't know, use them in your personal life, I guess. But like it's a great time saver for a lot of stuff. It short as a hallucinate, is hallucination. If people working on it, absolutely. This is only the biggest problem they have. A lot of people working on this. There's too much money to ignore these problems, so it'll get fixed. There's a rumor. Let's see, what's up?
This is a good question.
There's a rumor that industry is moving from cloud to on-premise again. Any truth to that?
You want to go first, or
I don't know. I don't. So I would say speculatively and anecdotally, sure. I don't have numbers to back this up, but I could see that happening. I think by the last time I checked, though, cloud penetration was only still at like, workloads in the public cloud was only like what 25-30%, and that number hasn't really budged that much.
Well, and here's my other take on this. Did you ever study Markov chains when you were studying statistics? Yeah. So Markov chains tell you the probability of moving between different states. And one of the most basic ideas of Markov chains is that to have a lot of people moving from state B to state A, say from cloud to on-prem, you have to have a lot of people in state B. If you have no one in state B, then that transition never happens, right? And so I think part of what we're seeing is that the more cloud penetration there is, the more you'll have people moving back, just because you'll have some percentage of churn that goes back.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that in the long term, we aren't moving to a steady state of having a lot of things in the cloud, because you'll have some companies moving on, some companies moving off. I'd say 10 years ago, there were so few big companies in the cloud that no one was moving back. And now a lot of them are in the cloud, and some of the workloads are going back.
Sure. But just given the amount of data center investment that's happening right now, I mean, it would be foolish to say that, the days of the cloud are over.
Right. Well, because it would be foolish right now for most companies to buy any NVIDIA GPUs. Just the capital cost is way too high. But they still may want to use NVIDIA GPUs. So you're going to go to AWS, you're going to go to maybe eventually NVIDIA to rent that resource, because it just doesn't not make sense financially to buy it yourself.
Yeah, I guess it's how many times you need to train and then for, but I think for even non-AI workloads, right? I think it just depends. Like there was a famous article from Basecamp where they, repatriated their workload from, the cloud back onto on-prem, right? And to me, that tells me that their workloads are very mature and predictable, right? So that may kind of end a story. If you have predictable workloads, I mean, you could make this calculation really easy in a spreadsheet in like 5 minutes or less. It's like a pizza ad. But I mean, it's just like, what are you spending here? What do you expect to spend here? What are the workloads? What's, all these other factors, IOPS, everything else, right? And then you price out. I mean, it's been done for decades. If you have unpredictable workloads, I would say that's where the cloud is good, because you can scale in ways that would just be very cost prohibitive. Because it's just kind of how it goes. And then obviously, as Larry points out, there's some industries like healthcare where and others that have some concerns about cloud and potential PHI exposure. Now, my pushback on this one is, it's you're only as good as your security profile. Right. So if you're in the cloud, if you're on-prem, if you're on a freaking Raspberry Pi, I'll give you some examples. When I'm in airports, I hang out at lounges. I can give you a lot of instances where I've heard people having meetings on their AirPods,
Oh, right.
talking
Yeah.
about confidential stuff, and you're just like, dude, there's a phone booth over there. You can go have your very secret meeting, and you don't need to tell all of us what's
So like
happening.
an insider trade on your stock or something.
Is it insider trading though? I don't know. Somebody blabbed. So
yeah. Wasn't that BP where there was an incident where the wife was a big executive at BP and was like, having these calls.
yeah,
Her
that
husband was
Yeah.
trading on BP stock.
Mhm.
Got, went to president, I think, for insider trading.
But risk profile depends on the industry you're in too, for sure. And also like if you're a retailer, retailers are notorious for not wanting to go on to a certain public cloud. Starts with an A, ends with an S,
Right.
Middle initials W. Because I can't say that anything bad happens, but there's speculation like, well, they could theoretically look at my workloads. Maybe, I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's ever happened, but that's the concern, right? So a lot of retailers will opt for somebody else.
Just as a firewall, basically. Yep. Yeah, and the thing you have to understand is that, how do I say this nicely? Maybe it's not going to sound very nice, but like a lot of people I see working on security within companies are just, some are very good, some are not very good. And so the quality of your on-premises security is only as good as like,
we've seen some horror shows, dude.
Security engineers internally. If you have really good security engineers who like stay up on the latest attack vectors, then that's great. But if it's just like trying to just security by obscurity that you think is going to save you, like watch out.
Yeah, the missing link in a lot of stuff is just humans anyway.
That's right. So. Yeah, and same thing in the cloud, right? You can be running everything on AWS. AWS actually makes a lot of security guarantees for you. Contractually, I'm not so sure, but if you're the person doing the AWS deployment doesn't know what they're doing, we've seen this again and again, right? Like there was the Cambridge Analytica, like I think they, among other issues, they were caught like just leaving buckets open to the public. So
I think AWS turns that off by default now. So not public, but
like it's still a big risk. Like if you do that cloud deployment incorrectly or on-prem deployment incorrectly, you're going to be in very serious trouble.
I have heard anecdotally, like companies like Dell, for example, are seeing a lot more business for private data centers. So that's and that comes from an on-prem software vendor. So
and years ago, like way back in 2015, 16, they already had the concept of private cloud where you would rent the hardware from them and then you would pay per usage, basically. So it wasn't just a buy the hardware. It was lived on your premises, but you paid by what you used. And so I wonder how that model is going now. Be curious to know.
I don't know. I would say a lot of it's kind of up in the air too, because now everyone wants to do AI. So again, it's like what does that mean exactly? I don't know for companies. But yeah, it's so I don't know that it's again the premise is, are you moving from cloud to on premise? Is this like an industry wide thing? I don't. Anecdotally, I don't see it. I don't see it borne out in the numbers. It's also one of those things I don't really look at numbers wise. It's something I don't really, I figure you're going to do your workload where it makes the most sense to you.
That's exactly it. My opinion, my take on this is that the best, most technically competent companies I see are doing some hybrid of the two. So, for example, there was an A16Z article some years ago that claimed that Dropbox had moved all of its operations on-prem. Yeah. But if you dug into it, it wasn't true. What they'd done is move their main storage service to their own servers. Right. But a lot of their workloads, like analytics workloads and interface workloads, are still running in the cloud. And that's because they wanted to build a very custom type of storage, which you're not going to get from S3, even though it's a good product. So they built that on their premises. But anything like highly scalable went to the cloud. Another example, Netflix. Netflix, you don't think of them as an on-prem company, but all their cache servers live in ISPs. Like most of the serving happens from cache servers. And in a sense, that's on-prem, even though they live in the ISPs. But all of their like video processing workloads, again, the UI web workloads, that all lives in AWS because it's highly scalable. And they're very good at optimizing the scaling of those workloads.
Even for this new company, I have a couple Raspberry Pis I'll probably be running some workloads in the background on, just because, I don't know. I mean, Raspberry Pi 5 has 8 gigs of RAM and multi-core. You can do quite a bit with that. So it's cheaper than a server. Cool. I think we've talked people's ear off. I guess, maybe we'll make this kind of a monthly or bi-monthly thing, bi-monthly being every 2 months or whatever. But I think it's good to, when Matt and I are together, we can just talk forever. It's nice actually having the chat, not having a guest, because we can just kind of like blab, and people are still here. Yeah. Which is amazing. Maybe it's just because it's the holidays and people are nothing else to do.
Well, the funny thing too is that I had a list of topics which we barely touched on. So
Oh, you did?
Let's keep going. Well, remember there was the we didn't go further into the Wall Street Journal.
You want to go
article.
until 1 o'clock?
No, we won't. We don't have to do that.
We can.
Like, on OpenAI, and there was the other article saying that the current approach to AI is a dead end, which I agree and disagree with. But yeah,
We kind of talked about that.
we did partially. Yeah, we'll go into it more the next time.
Yeah, but that won't be the topic then. It'll be
well,
AGI will have been here by now. So
that's right. Yeah.
We won't have anything new to.
We'll
to
be completely
discuss.
synthetic. We won't actually be on.
I mean, I
the
think
show.
it's been on my mind has been just how, and I think it's a theme for 2025 is what are the metrics that you would use to determine whether or not AI is successfully deployed in workloads or company wide, right? And I think this is, you can look at this as a company basis, but also at a macroeconomic level. Like, what are some of the metrics? It's something I've been noodling on. Because I mean, the whole promise is we're supposed to increase productivity. So the inputs would just be, well, how much labor did you input and how much did you get out of it, right? And so it's something I've really been pondering lately, because it's like, how would you, because I think there's a lot of consternation right now with employees, especially like, am I going to be replaced? And this isn't just tech and data, but it's a lot of professions now: accounting, law, most desk jobs, marketing. I mean, trepidation across the board. And so, what I've been looking at is, well, how would you know that we sort of hit an inflection point?
And I think at some point you just have to look at the employment numbers in some of these different professions. So our companies at a certain revenue scale, say 100 billion a year, hiring more or fewer marketing professionals. I think that's going to be one thing we'll look for.
It's certainly one thing, but then it has to be borne out in the numbers. Like this, because what got me thinking about this was the information, the news outlet. They had an article about how Microsoft and OpenAI, sort of determined AGI, or and what AGI meant to them was profits were at $100 billion. Profits defined by gross revenue less expense. So
net profit.
So I'm thinking, okay, that's a lot of money for any company to make. But that's where I think they define AG. So I was thinking more about that. I was like, okay, so I'd love to know the reasoning behind that. And that's what got me thinking, okay, so like how would you know that AI has been impactful in the companies? I think the notion, there's kind of two threads. I mean, employment numbers is certainly one. Or company profits, have they gone up because you don't have as many people? Or revenue's going up? Because the other thread of this is, if you have less people consuming services and products, revenue will go down because they don't have any money to spend on things. So I don't know, but
it's interesting too, because there's this idea in economics called Jevons paradox, and the idea is that as you get more efficient,
like Javon, like Avon.
Kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's anyway, he was arguing actually about coal and saying, well, steam engines are getting more efficient, but he argued that actually consumption would go up.
Yeah.
As efficiency.
Yes, this
increased.
one. Yep.
Yeah. And I think not only do we have the same risk with AI, but AI is a technology that doesn't need humans to run. In other words, traditional web app, right? Web app, people interact with the interface. That's what drives power consumption behind the scenes. Well, now the machines can just interact with other machines, driving potentially unlimited power consumption. That is a very interesting idea to me. And so you can have a scale up of economic activity without humans in the loop even. And that's pretty wild. I mean, this could be, when we talk about environmental devastation, we could be talking a whole new level of that. Or we have to figure out how to constrain that. Is our economy becoming an economy of like automation, just interacting? There was always been some of that, but like
robots talking to each other, and
basically, people have been arguing this for years with bot scraping and such on the web, but like it's a new level happening now.
So I mean, it's kind of like it's interesting. I mean, we used to send faxes to each other and ship things on dirty diesel trucks to each other. Now this is you can think of those as agents. Now it's that whole feedback loop is shortened.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, but sort of, so last question here, 2045 in the job market. What do you think?
I don't know. That feels like anyone's guess where we're going.
I don't know where we're going. There's so much happening, man.
Interest rates, the bond market, like
new
all
president.
these economic fundamentals are just so unpredictable right now. So setting aside even the tech aspect of the job market, like all these drivers of the stock market and things. I just don't know where they're going.
I don't know where they're going. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, because you got like potential trade wars happening. You got a new president.
You got actual wars happening.
You have actual wars happening, and maybe more happening. And so I think it's anyone's guess what happens with the job market. And I think this year in particular is probably one. If you were to ask last year, maybe it's slightly more quote predictable, even though I don't believe this kind of stuff is predictable. But I would say I can give you thoughts on the job market and what it, how I would navigate it. Maybe that's a better approach. But I would definitely, I've been advocating people, build your network, build your brand,
social skills,
all this stuff. Like your biggest enemy right now is people may or may not know who you are, right? But here's the deal. Layoffs happen a lot. Layoffs are going to continue happening a lot. All in the name of shareholder value and more productivity, because that's apparently what we worship now is shareholders and making them feel good about themselves. But that's the reality, right? I'm a shareholder. You're probably a shareholder of a bunch of stuff, right? So
your retirement depends on it.
Your retirement depends on it, but it all depends. And like everyone does less work or more work, depending where you are. So but I don't know. Like you said, there's factors that we just, it's a crazy world right now. Like, and it's interesting because if I ask this question in the U.S. and if I try to answer it, it's a different answer than I would give in Europe. Europe feels like it's just in a state of malaise right now when I'm there. Great place, some cool stuff happening, but the economies are kind of in the dumps universally. Australia feels very much the same way. So the U.S. Is the only country where I could say like it feels like we're doing really well right now, at least compared to the rest of the world. Whether this continues or not, I don't know. Again, you have a new president, you have new things coming in, and just there's a lot of factors.
Yeah.
So, but even as of like this month, right? We're in December.
Yeah.
I mean, there were layoffs happening at big companies, and they, big companies are announcing layoffs for next year because they kind of have to, right? That's if you're big enough and you have enough layoffs, you have to announce them. So that's some people have to look forward to next week is pink slips. That sucks. So
yeah, that part is no good. And going back to the European discussion, I wonder if we're going to see kind of a policy pivot, because I think the AI wave has kind of driven some new thinking on that. In particular, you have companies like Mistral, for example, that are based in Europe that are doing extremely well. And obviously, Europe wants to cultivate more companies like that. And then you have a lot of European founders who, even if they work out of Germany or France, their company is based in the Bay Area, or,
they have something
Delaware.
here.
So think of Hugging Face, like all the founders and leaders are like German and French, and yet they are based in the United States. And so I think there's kind of like this soul searching to say, why isn't that happening here? And what kinds of changes do we need to make to keep that talent here working?
I mean, I'm rooting for Europe. I mean, I go there all the time.
Yeah.
I got a lot of friends there. I mean, Europe's kind of my second home at this point. So I think but my constructive criticism of Europe is first of all, there's a mentality where I think there's just a pervasive sense where failure is a bad thing. And that I think prohibits a lot of people from wanting to go out and try something new.
Right.
And consider you have like some of the best safety nets in the world.
Right.
If something bad happens to you there, like, yeah, you'll be taken care of. If something bad happens to you in America, like you lose your job or say you go bankrupt, you could be living under a cardboard box under a bridge pretty quick, or in a box, not under one. You could put it on top of you, I guess, under a bridge. But I mean, that's reality, right? Like America's like, you can do the highest of highs. You can be the richest person in the world many times over even, right? You could do really well for yourself here. There's also no bottom to how far you can drop in America. And this is not unlike a lot of other countries where, I've been to where there's extreme poverty. Europe is not like this. Yeah. Europe, you have a safety net. So I'm like, why aren't you out there taking risks and doing stuff? Like what's the worst that's going to happen to you? Yeah.
I think there's also, I mean, we've heard about this from people we know in our network who have gone to Europe and started businesses like Americans, and part of the headache is just the registration process to create an entity and to register. It's just so involved.
That's a big one.
And I think the safety net is great. And I think maybe what Europe could learn is to say, well, if you're under this revenue, then you're not required to do this registration. Obviously, if you're like Siemens or Volkswagen, you're this huge employer. Yes, we need that safety net aspect. But if you're really small, will give you a bit more flexibility to allow you to grow into
Oh, no.
something. Right now, that doesn't quite
No, it doesn't.
exist
I mean,
in a lot of
we, you know,
places.
it was funny because like we were in Spain, and a friend of ours, she's American, started a business there. It took her a year to register businesses there, and you know, and then I met with the mayor of a certain city there as well, and the mayor's like, you know, we're open for business, and I was like, yeah, except are you?
Kind of painful. That's the problem. Like it's challenging. It's challenging.
Yeah, who do I have to buy off here? You, the mayor, to make this happen? So yeah, you're absolutely right. The regulations are just soul crushing. Like, there's no way you or I would move there to start a business.
And they're
No way.
valuable. I agree with that. Like, it's great to have some protections for workers.
Are they
for
valuable though?
example.
I mean,
Well,
it's like the paperwork you have to go through and the slowness.
what I mean is, if you are an employee, they have a lot of value.
Yeah, there's a lot of value there.
If you want to have the best of both worlds, then it's like, we've seen this in the United States, right? If you have an employee in Seattle, which we did at one point, you have to pay Seattle special taxes on payroll, except that it's only above a certain amount of payroll. And so as long as you're below that number, you don't have to worry about it.
To register a business there, and do all the business stuff.
Right? But yeah, there was other stuff we had to deal with.
Just paperwork galore, but it's not, but it's, again, it's not that bad.
Yeah. And it's also the idea that it's graduated, that as you get larger, and it's like, well, yeah, if I have 100 employees, I probably have an attorney and accountant to take care of these things. But if I'm just 2 employees, then I probably don't. And that's going to make me not want to scale if I have to go through all this stuff. So no,
but I talk to European entrepreneurs all the time and people doing startups there. And I think they're hungry to do stuff. They see what we're doing here, and I think they want to apply those lessons in Europe in a European way. And I'm supporting it. I'm like, I got a lot of friends there, and I'm rooting for them. There's a reason I go to Europe a lot, right? I do like the people there. I do like the companies there, and I like Europe, But America, I feel like my expectation is, this next year and probably during this next administration, make the money. If you're in America, like, get out there and make the money. Like, the business climate's going to be good if you want to get out there and hustle and make money, because that's what this is going to be about. That's all it is. If it was a climate where if you wanted to go make a dime or many, this is the business climate to do it in. So, because like that's my opinion. So, but what that means too is, especially with deregulation probably coming into America, I don't know what this does to job protections for people. I don't know what it does to the environment. I don't know what it does to a lot of stuff, right?
People's radar, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
healthcare.
It's hard to found a company if you are having to go pay for healthcare because you have some medical emergency.
Yeah, who knows, right? But that's out of anyone's control here, basically, right? Like, I would say, like, the thing I would say for this job market and probably others is, like, focus on what you can control. Right. Everyone is playing in the same playing field, at least theoretically. Obviously, if you're a billionaire, you play by a different set of rules than people like, less. But if you're watching our show, if you're a billionaire, it's awesome. Congratulations. Good to meet you. But I'm guessing not. Right. But I would say, and it's something that I learned from it was the chief operating officer from Under Armour, where this is during the financial crisis. And they had the saying at Under Armour where it's like, no loser talk. Everyone's competing in the same economic climate. Everyone's competing, in the same space, right? How do you outcompete in the situation? But don't just blame the economy for things. Don't blame this or that. Like, ultimately, you can control what you can control. So that's my advice. That's my opinion. So Matt may have a different opinion.
Well, at any rate, there are a lot of uncertainties for the coming year, and just try to think about various scenarios and where you want to take your career in life,
or where you want to live. I think on that note, though, I don't really know of any place that I would. I don't know. It seems like every place has issues right now. So I had a lot of friends saying, "Oh, I want to go to Europe," and I'm like, I don't think you know what it's like there right now.
It's not. It's different. It's changing.
It's different. Anyway, well, thanks to everyone who's bared with us for almost 2 hours. I guess the next time we'll be hanging out in public is at Day-to-Day Texas.
That's right. Yeah.
On January 25th.
Closing. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in the States or if you want to go to Austin, Texas, go check that out. So any announcements you have?
That's it for now. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm posting more soon, but yes.
Posting more. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a good New Year. We'll see you next year. All right.